So about a month ago, I made What If Luke Skywalker Went Back in Time? And many of you requested for me to make a longer form of this topic. So without further ado, part 1. Luke Skywalker sat cross-legged, floating with the Force above the Seeing Stone platform, his eyes closed in deep concentration. He breathed slowly and steadily, reaching out through the Force in search of his father's essence. He needed guidance, and he knew that Anakin Skywalker was the only one who could give it to him. But as Luke delved deeper into his meditation, he began to feel an unease in the Force. It was as if something was stirring, something dark and dangerous. He frowned, trying to focus on his search for his father, but the feeling persisted. Finally, he realized that he was being called towards something. It was a distant pull, like a faint whisper in the back of his mind. But it was there, and it was insistent. Luke followed this calling, feeling a sense of urgency, traversing within his meditation, letting it guide him deeper into the Force. As he traveled through the void, he heard voices echoing around him, whispering his father's name. He called out to them, hoping they could help him find Anakin, but the voices only grew louder and more insistent. Run! And Luke felt a chill run down his spine, but he did not run. He continued forward, determined to find his father and discover the source of darkness that was growing stronger by the second. Finally, a shadowy figure appeared before him, and Luke hesitated, unsure of what he was seeing. "Father?" he called out tentatively. The figure spoke, and Luke felt a shiver run down his spine. This was not his father. This was something far more evil, something that had been watching him.
"I have been waiting for you, young Skywalker,"
the figure said, its voice dripping with maliciousness.
"You and your father are no match for the power of the dark side."
Luke drew his lightsaber, igniting the blade with a hiss. He would not be intimidated by this creature, no matter how powerful it seemed. "I will never give in to the dark side," he said, his voice steady and firm. "I am a Jedi, like my father before me." The shadowy figure laughed, and Luke braced himself for the fight to come. He had no idea what lay ahead, but he was ready for whatever the dark side could throw at him. The shadowy figure continued to taunt Luke, its voice growing more sinister with every word.
"You will be a slave to me, just as your father,"
it hissed, its eyes glowing with a malevolent energy.
"You cannot resist the power of the dark side."
Luke tightened his grip on his lightsaber, bracing himself for the attack he knew was coming. The figure let out a horrifying scream and rushed at him with malicious intent, but before he could get too close, flying orbs that shined with hope surrounded the shadow figure containing it. Luke couldn't comprehend what was happening, but he knew the light was fighting back against the darkness. The fight was so powerful that the world around them began to break and bend, as if reality itself was being torn apart. Finally, a figure stepped out from the light. It was Anakin Skywalker, and Luke couldn't believe his eyes. "Father!" he cried out, running towards him. But before he could reach Anakin, the older Jedi screamed out, "No!" and raised his hand, suspending Luke with the Force and throwing him what felt like a great distance. As Luke began to awaken from his meditation, he could feel his body being pulled back to reality. He opened his eyes, gasping for breath, as he tried to make sense of what he just experienced. Slowly, he realized that Anakin's warnings were still echoing in his mind. "This is Palpatine's doing," he said. "You must stop him." Luke knew that he had to take action. The dark side was growing stronger by the day, and if he didn't stop Palpatine, the galaxy would be plunged into eternal darkness. Taking a deep breath, Luke rose to his feet, ready to take on whatever lay ahead. He knew that he couldn't do it alone, but with the help of his friends and allies, he was confident that they could bring balance to the Force once and for all. But Luke Skywalker couldn't believe what he was feeling. The Force, that energy that had always surrounded him, it was different. It was as if the universe was singing a different tune, and he couldn't quite place it. As he looked around, everything appeared to be the same, yet it felt wrong. His mind immediately went to his sister, Leia. He could not feel her presence through the Force. He had to make sure she was okay. With that in mind, Luke decided to head towards Coruscant. As he approached the planet, he saw something that made his heart skip a beat. There was a full-on space battle raging in the skies above the planet. Venator star destroyers and CIS ships were duking it out. and Luke didn't know what to make of it. As he flew towards the planet, he tried to make sense of what was happening. Suddenly, he saw two Force signatures that he knew very well, Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi. As he got closer, he saw that Obi-Wan's ship was infested with buzz droids. Without thinking, he reached out with the Force and threw the droids off the ship. Obi-Wan and Anakin were both shocked. They had no idea who had just saved them. Anakin was the first to speak. "Who are you?" he demanded. Luke calmly responded, "I am Jedi Master Luke Skywalker. This is some kind of joke, right?" "Please move on, you're interfering with a military operation," Anakin said. Luke was taken aback. He had pieced together what had happened. Somehow he was sent back in time to the Battle of Coruscant, one of the most significant conflicts of the Clone Wars. He had read all about it, but to be in the middle of it was something else entirely. "I'm not joking," Luke replied. "My name is Luke Skywalker." Anakin, getting frustrated, prepared to rebuttal, but Obi-Wan reminded Anakin they needed to get to the invisible hand to save the Chancellor. They quickly sped off with Luke trailing behind them, and soon all three Jedi would be in the hangar of the ship, deflecting blaster shots of the droids and dismantling them. Obi-Wan and Anakin would continue to question Luke, but Luke would tell them they needed to get to the Chancellor, and after saving him, they would talk. Luke even said that they could take him unarmed to question him if that made them feel safer. As they made their way through the ship, Luke couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and wonder. He had heard about this battle in stories, but to experience it firsthand was something else entirely. The sound of blaster fire, the smell of burning metal, and the adrenaline rush of combat were all so much more intense than he had ever imagined. Anakin and Obi-Wan were both still wary of Luke, but they couldn't deny his skill with a lightsaber. They fought their way through the ship, taking out droids left and right with their impressive Jedi reflexes. But Luke's natural talent seemed to be on a whole nother level. Finally, they had reached the Chancellor, where they found Count Dooku holding him captive. Anakin and Obi-Wan immediately engaged in a fierce lightsaber duel with the Sith Lord, while Luke used the Force to deflect blaster shots from droids. Despite their combined efforts, Dooku proved to be a formidable opponent, and he managed to knock both Anakin and Obi-Wan unconscious. Luke was left to face Dooku alone. As the Sith Lord approached him, Luke closed his eyes and let the Force flow through him. With a sudden burst of power, Luke lifted Dooku off the ground and sent him hurtling through the air, crashing into a nearby council. As Dooku rose to his feet, his eyes were flashing with anger. The Sith Lord raised his lightsaber, ready to strike, but Luke was ready. He ignited his own lightsaber, the blade glowing bright green, and prepared to defend himself. The two combatants circled each other, each waiting for the other to make the first move. Luke could sense the power in Dooku's strikes, but he was determined not to let his guard down. Suddenly, Dooku lunged forward, his lightsaber slicing through the air with deadly precision. Luke blocked the attack, his own lightsaber humming as it clashed against Dooku's. The two warriors continued to exchange blows, their lightsabers flashing back and forth in dazzling display of skill and agility. Luke felt his heart racing as he parried Dooku's strikes, and as he searched for an opening. As they fought, Luke became more and more aware of the dark side emanating from Dooku. It was like a palpable force that threatened to overwhelm him, but Luke refused to let it get the better of him. With a sudden burst of energy, Luke launched himself at Dooku, his lightsaber flashing in the air. Dooku tried to block the attack, but Luke's strength was too great, and he broke through the Sith Lord's defense. With a cry of triumph, Luke delivered a powerful blow, his lightsaber slicing through Dooku's arm and sending the Sith Lord's lightsaber clattering to the ground. Dooku staggered back, his face contorted in pain and fury. After Dooku's arm was cut off, Anakin and Obi-Wan gathered themselves and rushed to Luke's side, preparing to arrest the fallen Sith Lord. But Luke had other plans. He walked over to the Chancellor, his lightsaber still glowing in his hand, and prepared to free him. The Chancellor watched as he could see the murderous intent in the Force user's eyes. Suddenly, he cried out to Anakin to stop him. Anakin, sensing the Chancellor's fear, hesitated for a moment, but his anger got the better of him. With a sudden burst of power, Anakin charged at Luke, his lightsaber ignited and ready to strike. Obi-Wan shouted for him to stop, but it was too late. In a split second, Anakin's lightsaber clashed against Luke's, sending sparks flying in all directions. The two Jedi were locked in a fierce battle, their lightsabers flashing back and forth in a blur of motion. Luke would manage to graze Anakin's arm, and Anakin stumbled back, clutching his injured arm. Luke pressed forward, his lightsaber glowing brightly. But, to everyone's surprise, Anakin's eyes were filled with a new kind of determination. He was no longer fighting for the Chancellor, nor for the Jedi Order. He was fighting for his own survival. Anakin launched himself at Luke, his lightsaber swinging furiously. Luke was taken aback by Anakin's sudden ferocity, and for a moment, it seemed as though Anakin had the upper hand. But then, just as Anakin was about to deliver the final blow, Luke spoke. "Anakin, I have something to tell you," he said, his voice ringing out over the sounds of battle. "I'm your son, from the future." At first, Anakin didn't believe him. He thought it was just another trick, another ploy to distract him. But then, Luke began to present evidence. He spoke of Padme, of her death, and of his own birth. He told Anakin things that only he could know. Slowly but surely, Anakin began to believe. He could feel it in the Force, the connection between him and this strange, powerful young man. He realized that he was looking at the future, at a time that had not yet come to pass. For a moment, Anakin was at a loss for words. He stood there, staring at Luke in disbelief. But then, a look of understanding crossed his face. I can feel it," he said, his voice shaking. "I can feel the truth. You are my son." With those words, the battle was over. The two men lowered their lightsabers, and the fight came to a standstill. The Chancellor watched from the sidelines, his mind racing, contemplating what this meant for himself.